to today's webinar on integrated planning and advising services. We're thankful that you have joined us today, and we know that we're waiting for a few more people to navigate the GoToWebinar system and log in. This is focused specifically on the Northeast Resiliency Consortium's implementation and planning for these integrated planning and advising services. Here at Achieving the Dream, we have me, Meredith Hatch, Senior Associate Director of Workforce and Academic Alignment. I was glad to see most of you in Atlantic City just a few weeks ago. As were Carrie Henderson, our Associate Director of Programs for Leader Colleges, and Julia Lawton, our Assistant Director of Programs, working with new colleges. We three are here in Silver Spring, Maryland, and today we're lucky to be joined by our expert presenters who have vast experience in integrated planning and advising services. So from the Community College Research Center, we have Melinda Meacher-Karp. Many of you met her in Connecticut. Melinda is a Senior Research Associate at the Community College Research Center. We're also joined by Catherine Swanson. Catherine is the Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at Montgomery County Community College in Pennsylvania. Catherine is joined by Celeste Schwartz. Celeste is the Vice President for Information Technology and College Services at Montgomery County Community College. Thanks so much for joining us. So on today's webinar, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to open the lines for some Northeast Resiliency Consortium college updates on IPAS planning and implementation. And so we're hopeful that we will actually be able to open the lines so that you'll be able to speak. And if not, then we can always go to a backup where you're able to type in your questions. So in the corner of your screen, you will see something that looks like what's showing on your screen. So this is a little menu. And in this menu, you have the ability to type in questions and also to chat the audience. Another thing that you can do is raise your hands. So please raise your hands right now. Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Sue. I want to make sure that everyone's able to find the menu bar. Ooh, I'm seeing more and more. Thank you. Okay, so we're seeing a good amount of folks raising their hands. You found the menu, and we appreciate that. And throughout the webinar, sometimes this screen will minimize, and if that happens, you'll see a little tiny kind of dot menu at the corner of your screen, and you just need to click on that. That's B, if you see the letters on your screen, and it will maximize again. Okay, so that's a little bit about using GoToWebinar technology. So now we'll see if we can, in fact, open the lines for some college updates. So first I'll tell you a little bit about the questions that I'd like for you to respond to. So we really would like an update from each of the institutions on the line about where your college is in the process of implementing integrated planning and advising services. We spoke last as a consortium in July about this, and I know that you've had many conversations with Passaic about it, but it would be helpful if we could share that with other folks on the line and with our presenters. In that presentation, we'd like for you to highlight if you've had a big challenge so far. So what has that been? And we can address that. And then after we have the portion on college updates, then Melinda is going to talk a little bit about IPAS implementation tips and guidelines. Then we'll have Catherine Swanson and Celeste Schwartz from Montgomery County Community College talk about implementing IPAS at their college. and then we'll leave a good amount of time for questions and answers. Okay? So moving on and then opening the lines. So I can see we're unmuting you, and I can see the list of attendees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for updates from each of the institutions that are on the line. All right, and if we do run into any feedback, then we'll just mute a line, for example. So starting with Atlantic Cape. So I see that we have Michelle on the line. Michelle, can you give an update about IPAS implementation at your college and any challenges that you've faced so far? Michelle?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Can you hear me now? I was on mute, it said. Okay, yes. Thank you for unmuting me.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So here at Atlantic Cape, we are moving forward with the institution of a student planning system for academic mapping on the credit side of the college, but we're not really doing much with IPAS at all on the continuing ed side, which is where our programs of study are primarily based. So we are very much novices to this concept.
Okay. Thank you for that update, Michelle. Would you say that that's a challenge?
I would say so.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
So next up, we have folks from Housatonic on the line. Can you give an update on where your college is in the process of implementing, integrating planning and advising services, and any challenges so far? Elise? Morgan?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Morgan.
Yes.
Okay. I see Elise is on, but I'm not sure if she's able to connect. So I don't have much of an update. We're in the very beginning stages, and it's new to everyone on campus. So that's probably one of our biggest challenges, is that no one's really known about it.
Okay. And Morgan, are there any updates on specific technologies you're planning to use?
I'm probably not the best person to speak on that. I know Elise has had more conversations with faculty and staff here on campus, so I'm sorry I don't have much of an update on that.
That's okay. All right. Next up, from Passaic, we have a couple of folks on the line. So we have Robin, Sue, and Paul. Any updates?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Robin. We have decided to go with Aleutian because we're a digital school and an Aleutian school. I know that we've purchased the program that we're planning to use, and we are currently in the planning stage of rolling it out on the credit side and figuring out how to pilot it on the CE side.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Now, from LaGuardia, we have John and Michelle on the line. Any updates from LaGuardia?
Hi. We don't have any updates at this time. I'm just sort of kind of getting up to speed on what's happened in the last year with IPAS, but my understanding is we've been trying to sort of figure out how it would work with our existing systems, but maybe John can add a little bit more about what's been happening.
Yeah, not too much else to add, really. I think Michelle summed it up. Also, we just have very sort of diverse programs in terms of length, and so finding a program that's going to fit with the three separate kind of programming that we're running with the green programming, language programming, and then also the EMT program.
Right.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Update from Kingsborough? Any updates from Kingsborough?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. No, I don't think we have any updates from Kingsborough, but I'll check in with Elisa.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining today's call. So that's a little bit of some updates from colleges in the Northeast Resiliency Consortium. Did we have, so let's see. Okay, excellent. So what we'll do next is I'm going to pass the microphone to Melinda to talk a little bit about IPAS and give a recap of some things that she presented to us in July and also some of the lessons learned so far. So Melinda from CCRC.
Great, thank you. It's good to speak with most of you again. I'm working under the assumption that most of you were at our meeting in Connecticut, but not everyone, and also that even if you were, you may not remember everything. So I'm going to give a very quick debrief or recap, I guess, of what we discussed, really to frame the conversation moving forward about what does it take to get this up and running. And there are a couple of things that are useful to keep in mind as I speak. The first being that CCRC, for those of you who don't know or don't remember, among many other things, is looking at how colleges implement, deploy, and use IPAS systems. We're working with a subset of grantees from the Gates Foundation, Montgomery being one of them, to understand what happens when colleges try and engage in this work. And our working sort of orientation, it's become more than a hypothesis at this point, it's sort of the underpinning assumption for a lot of what we do, is that the technology is in some ways ancillary to the broader reform. So the purpose of IPAS isn't just to get a better technology out there, although that's a good thing, but really to use that as a way to rethink how advising, program planning, and student support are done, and then have a tool to do that. So essentially, we know that at most community colleges, certainly not all, but most, advising and support isn't done in a way that is optimal because of lots of really good logistical reasons, right? You've got to register 6,000 students in the span of 2 weeks. You only have a limited number of faculty and staff, so sitting down and having a developmental conversation with students that lasts a half an hour is probably not in the cards. And so if we rethink how we would like to do advising or program planning or student support, some of what we'd like to do needs to be mediated by technology or gives us the tools to do something new and different. And it's that something new and different that's really the end goal of an IPAS implementation. Obviously, having a better button and easier system is really important. But just because you put out a new tech system, with all due respect to Celeste and all the other IT people, that doesn't mean the rest of us are going to actually use it. And then it just sits there and it withers on the vine, and that's very sad for everyone involved and doesn't change student outcomes. So that's sort of a working hypothesis that we have, and we're seeing it bear out in our colleges, that it's really, at the end of the day, the hardest work, as hard as the tech side is, the hardest work is about thinking about what that process change is going to look like. Like, what are those bigger reforms? The other thing I just want to point out is that IPAS is kind of a mushy title for a number of different tools and interventions. It can include things like program planning, and it can include things like early warning systems and case management. The processes that stem from, you know, an early warning deployment are going to look different than the program planning. And so that's just important to keep in mind, is that when we're talking about IPAS, we're really talking about a couple of different things, which ideally speak to each other but may or may not. So what we've been doing is working with these colleges to understand the implementation and adoption process. We started this work about 2 years ago, looking really in depth at change management and technology adoption literature, trying to understand what are sort of the antecedents, or what do you need to do based in the literature to be successful. And then we've used that to go out and collect data excuse me, as colleges engage in this work. We were in our colleges about a year ago right now as they were just beginning the process. And we did that very deliberately because we wanted to know what the pre-IPAS situation was and also how folks were approaching their implementations. We collected, I think it's about 170 interviews and focus groups that we did. We watched advisors do their jobs in a structured way. We collected a lot of data, which we've spent the past year analyzing. We also checked in with our sites last spring, sort of like a 6-month check-in, to get a sense of how things were going and which colleges were having success and which ones were struggling. And we are now gearing up to go back and visit all of our colleges in January and February of 2015, which is frighteningly soon, at which point we'll be able to figure out really what's changed, what hasn't, and why. So what I reported on in July and what I still can really report on is, you know, sort of what we saw at the beginning and midpoint, not at all at the end. And so thankfully, Catherine and Celeste will correct me on things that have changed with their college since the last time we collected data. That said, we've now analyzed all of our first-round data. When I spoke to you all in July, I was still feeling like our findings were pretty tentative. We hadn't made it through all of the data yet, but we've landed in a place where we feel really confident that what we're seeing makes a lot of sense. And so the 4 things that you see on your screen are sort of our 4 big takeaways. I should note, and Meredith, maybe we can send this out later, we do have 2 publications. I think one of them may have been released after we met in Connecticut, talking about the framework for adoption. One of them describes sort of how we think adoption happens and process change happens. The other is actually a tool that colleges can use to sort of walk through a self-assessment process, understanding where you are in terms of getting ready for change from a tech side, from a project management side. It's a series of questions, and we can get that link out to you because it's supposed to be a really handy tool. And we will be releasing probably early 2015 3 reports that essentially talk about these 4 findings. One of them will be very practical, you know, sort of what were the surprises that colleges encountered during this process, and then 2 others will be a bit more focused, one looking at leadership, which we have found to be an extraordinarily important and somewhat surprising piece of the puzzle, and another focused on how students perceive advising and technology-mediated advising. So stay tuned for those. But these are the 4 lessons that I talked about in July, and we think that, you know, colleges that recognize these lessons and engage in this work should kind of do this first. So what we find is a lot of colleges find, oh, there's a product, I want to use it, it looks really cool, and often it is. And then they sort of back map what that would mean for what people do. So rather than think about what changes they need to make and then find a product that works for it, they say, oh, I want to use Ellucian, or oh, I want to use Starfish. And then they have to figure out after the fact, how am I going to use it? And our sense from the data is that if you think about the how first, you're going to be in a much better place to get people to actually use the technology, create change, and change the experiences for students, which potentially changes their outcomes. So the first thing we've learned is that you really need to plan for process change. And by that, what I mean is figure out what you want to do differently. We don't want students to stand in line anymore. We want them to know who their advisor is. How would we do that? What would we need to have in place? And then you can figure out what technology will enable you to do that. Similarly, be really clear on the needs that IPAS will address. We've been in a couple of colleges where everyone you talk to has a different vision of what IPAS is supposed to do. And often they're really great visions, or they think that IPAS is going to fix one piece of the puzzle, and someone else thinks that IPAS will fix a different piece of the puzzle. And that's really challenging from an adoption perspective because everybody's wanting something else different to happen. Rather than having a clear sense of like, this is the problem and this is what we're going to fix. And so there needs to be a lot of dialogue around what is it that we're trying to do with this technology system or this technology-based reform, which kind of gets into this develop and communicate to end users an actionable vision of benefits. We found, at least when we were there last fall, and I think quite a few colleges kind of took this to heart and realized that this was an important step, and there's been a sea change on this one in our sites, I think, which is that you need to get, particularly the people who are supposed to use the technology, the advisors, the students, a clear vision of what that means and why it will benefit them. And what we found is that it needs to be much more concrete than just this will enable more effective advising and improve student success. It needs to be something that people can wrap their brains around. I'm going to do my job differently in this way because of this, whatever it might be. We were finding that in a lot of our colleges that vision lived very clearly in the heads of the people who were running the initiative, but it hadn't really been rooted in what end users, the advisors and students, were going to need to do. And so they were confused and nervous and didn't quite know what it meant for them, and in a number of instances, you know, sort of threatening not to use it. And once to your end users what is expected of them, they become much more comfortable with the process. And finally, leadership, and I'm going to go through this quickly, even though I think it's really fascinating because I want Catherine and Celeste to talk. The leadership was really surprising because what we're finding in these big reforms, like IPAS mediated advising reforms, is that you need to have almost a dual tier of leadership, and that those two tiers need to be on the same page. So often we think of leadership as living sort of with a president or a dean and having a really big vision there. And that's important because those institutional leaders are the ones who can communicate that this is important work and that even though it's hard, it's worth engaging in. But what we're finding is that that's not sufficient. You also need a project level leadership that is aligned in their vision, that understands what the administration is trying to do, but can communicate sort of the nitty-gritty and get the nitty-gritty work done. That's very much in a give and take with the institutional leadership. So we had 6 colleges. 2 had what we call really strong administrative leadership. 2 had project leadership, but the administration was kind of, they were supportive, but they weren't terribly engaged, let's say. And then 2 had what we call this multi-tiered leadership. And I'd say 2 that shifted to 3 by the spring. And it was only those 2.5 shifting to 3 multi-tiered colleges that we saw real movement in terms of the likelihood of changed practice. And so that was fascinating because a lot of the literature just talks about the need for high-level leadership. And we found that this project-level leadership and coming up with a synergistic relationship between administrators and project-level leaders was really essential. And so we're trying to unpack that a little bit more, but we think that's really important. So I'm going to leave it with that. I think we can probably open it up for questions later, but hopefully Catherine and Celeste will give you some details about what I mean by all of these things, because I think they lived these 4 findings quite intently over the last year, year and a half. So I'm going to turn over to the folks at Montgomery.
Thank you, Melinda. So Montgomery County Community College, we started our student success journey really a year before IPAS was even something on our radar screen, to tell you the truth, not necessarily as a concept. So our student success journey, though, started, probably about 10 years ago as part of our strategic plans, and then we became an Achieving the Dream College in 2006. And you see some of the slides there from some of our student celebrations when we became an Achieving the Dream Leader College, and then as we engage students with our completion pledges and getting students on board with the concept of committing to their own completion. So student success has been a critical part of our journey here at the college for a long time, and a big part of our talking about it, things that we needed to do. We were doing a lot of work in developmental education. We did a lot of work with mentoring programs, particularly for minority male students, where we saw a lot of achievement gaps. And then more recently, recognizing that to really move the needle, we needed to do something with transforming some of our processes. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Or can I control that? Oh, I can control it. Great. So from there, we jumped into, and I think Melinda's pretty much explained this slide, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. I think you have a sense of what IPAS is by now. But when we were thinking about IPAS in relationship to preparing for this particular presentation, we realized that it also intersects with some of the TACT work that we've done. And in reviewing who all would be participating on this call. And I heard several of you mention the challenges of your schools were moving forward with planning systems or IPAS as it relates to credit side. You're still kind of figuring out what that means on the non-credit side, where I'm assuming most of your TACT programs are probably residing at this point. Celeste and I have both been very involved with two TACT projects here at our college. We're part of a statewide consortium TACT grant from round one, in which all the work that was done was really contained in non-credit, supporting 3 or 4 areas of programs at all the colleges. We were part of helping to support the technology, or select the technology to support it, for the academic coaching and career coaching that would happen for the participants with the program. And I'm going to use that as an example of lessons learned and what we wouldn't do. And Celeste, feel free to chime in on this. What happened with that, as we're coming to the end of that particular grant, is something was developed to support those programs in a deep way, but it isn't lasting beyond that because it never got integrated back into the rest of the colleges. And so I think that's an important thing that I wanted to share, because I think as you're getting started at some of your colleges, thinking about, as you implement, what is it that's going to have legs and be sustainable after you leave.
And yeah, this is Celeste. Just a follow-up to Catherine's point. And as I took notes, as each of you were speaking about where your colleges were, you really, as Melinda said, and Catherine will talk more about this as well, you need to really develop your plan so that it's easy to see where the technology fits, and not to pick the technology and then develop the plan as to how you're basically going to change your organizational processes. That is almost always, the results are almost always not acceptable or even failures. As far as the TACT, the 2 TACT grants, one technology success and one technology failure. The one that Catherine is talking about, the TACT 1 grant, I'll give you a lot of reasons for the failure. There were, I think, 5 or 6 of the 14 community college IT folks who were involved in this. First of all, they wanted something very custom, yet the TACT program in total was sort of restricted. And it's so customized that it really is difficult to stretch it out beyond the grant. So that's one thing. Look for tools and technologies that sort of map to what you want to do. On the other hand, oftentimes there's other good things that those technologies can do for the institution. I think the second thing on and the second caution would be, dollars fund these initiatives. You should have plans for how you're going to fund beyond the grant. And many, many of the technologies today have annual licenses. So be careful about what you select and make sure the institutions have buy-in to continue the use of those technologies when private funding is no longer available,
the grant funding. And so with our second tax grant, we're doing a statewide platform to support prior learning assessment and I think the other piece of that is that's made it different is it's involving people from across the colleges. Each of the 14 colleges, we've got folks from academic affairs, student affairs, workforce development, and in building out the system. So we've got those strategic connections, not just in the workforce folks who are implementing the training components of the grant, but in this bigger project that will have legs then once the grant goes away. So I think that that's a key component. So as you're working on your projects, I really encourage you, and we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes, to make sure that you're making those right connections with others on your campuses so that as you're building those systems, people can see how they can be used in other ways to support them. And that's what's going to create the sustainability for you. So next, to jump into our planning process. And so our planning process, as I said earlier, we started about a year before the IPAS grant opportunity even came along. And it started with combining, we had two divisions, enrollment management and student affairs. We pulled the two divisions together into one unit at the college to be able to create more seamless processes. Because what was happening is you have your applications and your records and registration on the enrollment services side. You've got your commencement and your and graduation processing and everything, but then all this other stuff that happens in the middle that rely on academic advisors to make it happen were reporting through student affairs. And so we ended up with gaps between the two. So we pulled them together into one division and then created a steering committee to look at all of our processes. And we used the completion by design models. I think the one modification we made is we added transition, because it's not just about preparing students to complete with us, it's about how do we help them transition for transfer or for job placement. But if you look at those green and gray areas, that is where, as we were doing the planning and trying to redefine what the role of advisors would be, that we realized that we couldn't expect our advisors to be case managers for students or to, in that way with the volume of students without technology to help us support that. And so we really, as Melinda said, we did a lot of planning up front. Now, did we have some folks who weren't fully on board because they didn't fully understand what this would look like in the end? Yeah, I would say that's probably true. But there was also a good core group that was involved in the designing what our pathway ought to look like for students as they come into the college. And so this little drawing is really to how do they come in as an applicant? What does that look like? When do we assign advisors? We used to assign advisors by alphabet, and it was about the third week of the semester when a student found out who their advisor was going to be. We now assign them by major, and they get their advisor at the time that they are accepted to the college. So right after they apply and receive their acceptance packet that has their single point of contact with their academic advisor there. Their advisor then guides them through placement and whether they're college ready or not, whether they need to take placement testing or not, depending on that holistic evaluation, because we're now using college or high school transcripts, college transcripts, and other measures to help us determine when whether or not a student is ready for college-level coursework. They start with a new student registration session that happens sometime during the summer, typically for a fall semester, and then just the week before classes start, another orientation session that's more about the just-in-time information they need in order to start classes. The part that we've just finished for the first time is our educational planning sessions that happen in between the 4th and 8th week. So every new student is meeting with their assigned advisor and developing their educational plans. That's going to take them through completion. So those conversations are starting with conversations about what is it you want to do? What kind of job do you want to get? Are you transferring? Where do you want to transfer? So that as they design the educational plan for that student, they have that end and that transition in mind, and then a student can see what they're going to be doing throughout. And then we support them with our Student Success Network, which is our early alert system, of which we're using Starfish for throughout. So that's a quick overview of the system, the process we designed. And then after that, we went through to figure out what are the technologies that we need to support that system. So if we could skip to the next slide. And that's just a quick shot of our advisors. And here's the one that I'm going to ask Celeste to talk a little bit about, because it's multiple technologies. There's not one that can do everything that we need.
So there's a lot of technologies listed on this screen. I'm just really going to focus on the topic for today, which is, you know, what did you do with IPAS and what new technologies were brought in? Let me first say that in some cases, the technologies were swapped. In other words, we had technologies, and I'll talk through each of those, that did things but didn't quite hit the mark. The beauty of the IPAS grant, it gave us the opportunity and a little bit of funding to re-explore some other technologies that maybe were more robust, more current. So first, as I said earlier, we took the map that Catherine just went through, and we looked at where, especially within the IPAS area, what were the technologies we had? Were they hitting the mark? And if not, then we needed to look for new technologies. So we talked about technology alignment. We took advantage, by taking advantage of the grant, it did allow us to look at, as I said, other tools and gave us that flexibility. And the end result was we ended up with working with 3 vendors, 4 tools. Prior to IPAS, the college had an early alert system, and the college had a scheduling system that permitted students to schedule advisor, counselor time, as well as tutoring sessions. We took both of those tools. We're sort of okay, not perfect. On the retention, I'd say that was not good at all. We didn't really get a lot of faculty participation. So the tools we moved to Starfish Connect and Starfish Early Alert. Those tools, the Connect tool is a web-based tool that allows students to schedule their own advising and tutoring appointments, has the capability to do that. And the Early Alert system, obviously, by its title, allows faculty to basically send flags that create this automated workflow that end up at an advisor desk with a student and so forth. There's also the ability in that system to trigger alerts based on things that the students have done. For example, we could trigger alerts based on attendance. If we collected attendance, we could trigger alerts based on grading. And there's many other things you could trigger alerts on. The other tool Catherine mentioned briefly, Ellucian Student Educational Planning, we just launched. Students are raving about it and love it. The advisors seem to love it too. In all three of those tools, we've tested the response of our faculty, advisors, and students multiple times, and we're getting very, very positive responses on all of the tools. It really has, the tools have supported the advisor in really changing their role in a pretty significant way, because a lot of the stuff that advisors used to do that really weren't so much advising, but more the mechanics of doing and recording things. A lot of that is really in a much more automated methodology than what it was in the past, which allows advisors to do what we want advisors to have the most time to do, which is really talk with their students. This process, I don't want to act like this was easy. This wasn't easy. The tools part were pretty easy. We really hit home runs on all 3 tools that we launched, and we have the data that indicates that we did that. But I have to say, to be perfectly honest, we went slower to go fast, if that makes any sense. We really slowly rolled out Early Alert, and we rolled it out in a very unique way. We rolled it out using the Starfish Early Alert system from a grading standpoint, from really a midterm. It's not really a grade. It's sort of a progress update. And faculty loved it. And really, from that point forward, last spring, it's been tons of training, but lots of faculty have been very responsive, as have been the advisors and students. And the last piece to the puzzle is that we are working right now. The last part of our grant is to build a dashboard for students and for advisors, so that if you notice, I've talked, our ERP system, by the way, is a Lucian colleague. So we have tools that we're using that are not all from the same vendor, and our advisors on a regular basis also pull up the student information in their learning management analytics system, Blackboard. So what we're trying to do is to create a single dashboard for students and advisors that will mash up the data from educational planning, which is an Lucian tool, the LMS, which is Blackboard, and the information within Starfish. And that's in process.
Yeah. And I think, one of the big, Celeste referred to the tools, we, kind of slowed it down to hurry up. I think the big piece of this was advisors really took the time to figure out what their work would be like. So it wasn't about adopting the new tools. Right. It really was about what is it that we accomplish with students. It was going back and revisiting what our student learning outcomes are for academic advising, because we do have SOLs for advising. How is it that we accomplish those? And then reintroducing the tools so that they saw how the tools help them get to their role as faculty in teaching students how to self-advocate, how to plan, how to use self-service tools, how to look at setting goals and those kinds of things. So I think that was a big help for us with this whole process, was really taking the time with the advisors to help them map out what their processes were, and then they saw how the tools supported them doing what they knew was important work for them. The next slide before we wrap up for questions. I think one of the things that's really important in order to make IPAS work, it's really involves a lot of people at the college. It's not about something that happens isolated in one area with IP support. IPAS might be at the center of this, but the advisors, the success coaches, whatever you might call them in your processes, are a key part. But it also involves your enrollment and services and registrar. This wouldn't work if we didn't have our degree audit all cleaned up, so that, because especially if you're implementing planning tools, they rely on a strong degree audit, a well-constructed degree audit. And I think that's where the credit, non-credit piece sometimes makes it hard to envision how that could happen. And I can't say that I've got the answer on that, but there is a way to create non-credit program, degree audits for non-credit programs. You can do that in the tool because we've looked at that to support some of our TAC programs in the past and our non-credit programs in the past. It involves academic fairs, institutional research. There's a lot of data that feeds into this, comes out of this that would be very helpful. And then with the community, how do you communicate? What tools do our internal audience and external audience? So we engage marketing to assist us with that. And so with that, that's kind of where we're at and what our journey has been thus far. I think it's time to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that presentation from Leader College, Montgomery County Community College. So what we're going to do now is we're going to reopen the lines so that we can have a question and answer session where you can ask questions of the presenters or questions to each other. We have about a little bit less than 10 minutes for this portion of today's webinar. So you may just verbally speak your question, or you're also welcome to type your question into the questions pane, and I'll be able to read that to our presenters. So as folks are getting started thinking about questions that they might have, we have one from Robin at Passaic. So the question is, how did you get faculty buy-in?
So, yeah, this is Celeste. So there were a few little pain points with faculty around early alert. So they were anxious for a different tool. They wanted to participate in the process, felt that the tool that we had was cumbersome. We also basically by contract require faculty to do a midterm progress report, and we knew that we were having about a 70% response rate. So that's some of the reason we were having a lower response rate than 100% was because it wasn't maybe as easy to do. And in both of those cases, Starfish was so much more user-friendly that we took advantage of the tool, and it really turned out to be better than what we expected. Both faculty just appreciated that we respected their time and that what we were putting in place was so much better than what they had before, that they're actually asking for more uses of the tool. So in some ways we got lucky. We tried to find that sort of niche area where we could make improvements and explain to them how this would be easier for them, and we were able to deliver on that.
Thank you.
Another question is specifically from Atlantic Cape, Michelle. So the question is, can the system also track students as they move to the workforce? For example, tracking interviews or tracking job placement?
So, it's interesting. We just had this conversation yesterday with one of our trustees, and no, this system really doesn't. You can through notes, but not in a way where you can pull the data out easily for reporting. And so this wouldn't be the right tool. If we went back to if we were to go back to the slide that showed all the technologies on it, you would see in parentheses CRM mentioned. And so we are, as a college, looking to purchase a CRM tool. That would be one in which we would be able to track through all the way and to the through alumni activity and so on. So that would really take somebody from prospect through their experience as a student and then their transition and as alums. So no, unfortunately the tools we currently have don't do that, but we are cognizant of our need to do that and looking to use a CRM. That'll be one of the specifications as we select a tool for that.
And I think the other interesting piece is certainly Starfish is a CRM, but it's limited within its focus, and we will be looking to, which is probably going to be a little bit tricky, we're looking for a comprehensive customer relationship management tool from first touch point through basically the full life cycle, including continuous contact as their alums. And Starfish will be somehow a component of that piece, because we're very early in the specification stage. I can't tell you how it's going to connect in, but it will need to connect in. But no, Starfish at this point really takes care of the process, the IPAS process as it's been described.
Great, thank you. So talking specifically about possible methods for tracking students as they move into the workforce and using a customer relationship management system for that. Other questions from folks, you can type them in or you can just speak because we have unmuted your lines. So then I have a bit of a question. Can you talk just a little bit more about, I know, because I know a number of colleges in the consortium are interested in using Ellucian. Can you talk a little bit more about how you prepared to implement use of Ellucian?
So I think, if I am not mistaken, I think some of the schools on the line are colleague and some are banner. Correct, yes. On the student educational planning, that's on the colleague side, but on the banner side, there is DegreeWorks. So so as far as, I'm not clear on the question as far as how you want to know how we went about implementing or how we knew that that was the right tool.
So I think it's, I guess it's both. So how did you know it was the right tool, but also particularly as you prepared for implementation, what were some of the steps that you would want to make sure to tell others to follow or at least consider?
Sure. So first of all the tools that ended up as part of the IPAS grant were none of them were selected by technology people. The technology folks supported identifying all the possible tools in the marketplace that could be used. And then we had a group that worked on IPAS made up of advisors, faculty, support staff, administrators, in academic affairs and student affairs and finance, to basically look at the tools, and we went through a typical technology review process and then landed on the tools that we were interested in. As far as what was the process to get it implemented, all of these tools, when you buy tools today, you can't, no vendor sells you a tool without also a component of the price for implementation. We had a large team, as I said, and that team worked through the implementation plan with the vendor. We had regular meetings regarding, and this is separate from all the other IPAS work that's going on. There were regular meetings around the specific implementation of each of these tools, including timing the go-live dates based on significant things that are happening. Like, we didn't go live 2 weeks after registration started. I mean, do you know what I mean? You time the release of these tools based on when, if you advertise, then people would want to use it immediately. So timing of the tools and the release dates is also an important thing. And really and truly, from my standpoint, for this particular project, the rollout, the coordination of the rollout for Starfish and educational planning was basically led by an advisor. I think that was another win for us. It wasn't led by an administrator. The advisor it has faculty rank. It wasn't led by an administrator. It was supported by 3 or 4 tech folks from IT who closely work with that person, but the lead was the advisor, and I think that really helped us as well.
Great, thank you. Any last questions before we wrap up? I'll pause a moment. Okay, so thank you so much for that excellent presentation and the really good responses to questions that the Northeast Resiliency Consortium is considering right now. We appreciate that very much. So what I'll do next as we begin with the wrap-up phase of this webinar is we're going to show a poll on your screen about your experience with today's webinar, and so we'll ask for your responses there. So you can just look at those questions and start responding. And as you do that, I want to thank you for your participation today from the Northeast Resiliency Colleges who are all considering use of integrated planning and advising services at your colleges, and for different students, both students taking credit courses and non-credit courses at your colleges. And I also want to thank our presenters. From Montgomery County Community College, a leader college in achieving the dream, and also Melinda Mitra-Karp from the Community College Research Center. So thank you so much for your participation today. The responses are coming in pretty well. We have about 67% of you who have voted so far. So get those poll responses in. So some of the things that we're seeing as the poll responses are coming in now, with 83% of folks voting. So we had about 40% of you thought that this webinar presented helpful tips in implementing IPAS. About 40% of you, this webinar helped you consider your next steps in IPAS. And some of you found the webinar interesting and engaging, and some wanted some more helpful tips. And so we'll make sure that we have some ability to follow up and answer different questions later on. So again, I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar for the Northeast Resiliency Consortium, focusing on the integrated planning and advising services, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. We will send webinar information, including the PowerPoint and the resources that Melinda mentioned, to you via email, and we will also put these on Ning. Take care.